Prologue, the contract. Some people are born into blessing. Others are born into a debt they never agreed to pay. Zane Mercer arrived in the world at 11:59 p.m. on a night when the sky refused to hold its stars. His mother, Delia, wept when she first held him, not from joy, but from the weight of what had already been surrendered in exchange for his existence. His uncle Dorian stood in the corner of the hospital room with his back pressed against the wall, watching with the quiet satisfaction of a man who had just signed the most consequential contract of his life. The subject of that contract was his nephew, the boy being washed clean in the nurse's arms, the one blinking at the world with eyes that would never, in this life, learn to be innocent. The arrangement had been made long before Zane drew his first breath. Dorian had traded the firstborn son of the next generation in exchange for wealth, protection, and deliverance from the kind of obscurity that had swallowed their family whole for 3 generations. He hadn't told Delia. He simply arranged it, in the particular language such arrangements require, on a night when desperation made the terms seem reasonable. And the night Zane was born, what came to collect its property did not announce itself with thunder or fire. It settled into the boy's blood like ink into water, silent and permanent, and the soul that might have grown freely was instead claimed before it could reach for anything else. They said Zane was an extraordinary child. Extraordinary in the way that means something different depending on who is using the word. He had gifts that should not have been possible, for music, for performance, for making people feel understood. He could walk into a room and shift its entire atmosphere. He could sing 4 bars of something unrehearsed and leave the listener feeling as though the song had been written specifically for their private grief. These things were true. What was also true was that every gift he carried was borrowed, a loan with compounding interest, extended by a lender who expected full repayment in human currency. By the time Zane was 23, he was the most talked-about entertainer in the country. Singer, actor, the kind of person whose name alone sold out venues months in advance, whose face on a screen made the room go still. He had everything the world understood as enviable. He felt nothing. Not love. Not peace. Not even the merciful blankness of emptiness. Emptiness at least would have given him something to feel. He had a presence that called itself Lyra, a voice that arrived in the spaces between mirrors and whispered in the rests between musical bars. She appeared as a woman, or the shape of one, and called herself his guide, his spiritual mother, the keeper of the arrangements. She reminded him of his purpose when he forgot it. She reminded him that every life he touched and left in ruin was a deposit toward a debt his uncle had created before Zane was old enough to understand what debt meant. He was good at ruining people. Terrifyingly good. He could dismantle someone's confidence with a single well-placed silence. He could take a woman's best understanding of herself and quietly replace it with something hollow. He had done it so many times that it had ceased to register as cruelty. It was simply what he did. The way water does not question why it flows downhill. And then a name was given to him. A specific name attached to a specific face in a city he barely registered on a map. Jade Calloway. Lyra spoke about her with an urgency she usually reserved for situations that had already gone wrong. She said Jade carried something that, if left intact, could undo years of carefully constructed ruin. She was winning people, not to herself, but to something older and far more powerful than anything Lyra served. She had to be stopped, not killed. That would only canonize her. She had to be broken, her faith shattered, her God made to look like a lie she had told herself. Her soul surrendered willingly, so that the surrender itself became the wound that couldn't heal. The strategy was precise: get close, earn trust, manufacture love, then destroy from the inside. It was a strategy Zane had used before on smaller targets. He received this assignment with the bored confidence of someone who has been asked to do something they've done 100 times. He was about to learn that there are people in the world for whom no strategy he owned had ever been built, and that the most dangerous thing that can happen to a person who has never known love is to stand, unexpectedly, in the presence of something real. Chapter 1, Morning Grace. The alarm never rang. Jade Calloway was already awake by the time the first pale thread of daylight pressed through the gap in the bedroom curtains. She was kneeling beside her narrow single bed, her hands folded, her forehead resting lightly against her intertwined fingers, lips moving in the quiet rhythm of her 5th prayer of the morning. Dear God, steady my heart. I surrender everything into your hands. You know I cannot do anything without you. Be with me as you always are. Please, Father. She remained still for a long moment after her words ran out, the way a person lingers in a warm room before stepping out into the cold, holding on to the heat a moment longer than necessary. Her relationship with God was not performance. It was not the kind of faith that arrives on Sundays and retreats by Monday. It was the most fundamental thing about her, more constant than her name, more certain than any human arrangement she had ever relied on. You could spend a year in her company and understand her only on the surface. But watch her pray for 5 minutes, and you would know her completely. She rose from her knees and smoothed the front of her sleep shirt, blinking the room into focus. Across from her, her 6-year-old brother Henry occupied the full width of his bed in the particular sprawl of childhood sleep, arms flung wide, mouth slightly open, one small foot dangling off the edge of the mattress, as though he had been mid-adventure when unconsciousness claimed him. She watched him for a moment. He looked like something too soft and too certain for the ordinary world. She had always felt that about Henry, as if God had made him as a reminder of what people are before life gets to them. Then she heard voices. Not the usual morning murmur of her parents moving through the house, the coffee percolating, the creak of her father's chair in the study, the television on low for the morning news. This was different, a particular rise and fall that she recognized the same way she recognized Sunday mornings, as a feeling before it was a sound. Phoebe. She was out of the room before she had fully completed the thought, bare feet quick and quiet on the wooden floor, rounding the corner into the living room with the unguarded expression of someone who has just received the best possible news. Phoebe! Her older sister stood up from the sofa with arms already open, and Jade ran into them the way she had since childhood, entirely without self-consciousness, her whole body communicating what words couldn't quite catch up to. "You're here early," she exclaimed, pressing her face against Phoebe's shoulder. "You didn't say good morning to Mom and Dad," Phoebe laughed, pulling back and raising one eyebrow with the practiced authority of an older sibling. Jade spun around, noticing for the first time that her parents were seated across the room, her mother's expression carrying the particular quiet weight it had worn for the past week. "Oh, I'm sorry. Good morning, Mom." "Good morning, Dad." "Good morning, Jade," her mother said, and the dryness in her voice wasn't unkindness. It was grief, the particular grief that comes from loving people who keep growing up and walking out the door. Jade crossed to her and sat at her feet, looking up into her face the way she had as a small child. "Are you still sad?" Her mother's eyes glistened immediately. "Of course I still am. Phoebe grew up too fast and got married and moved away. She left me, and now you've finished school, and you want to go with her." She pressed her lips together against whatever came next. "Jasper is still in high school, but it won't be long. And Henry," her voice broke slightly on his name. "Henry is only 6. Mom." Phoebe's voice was gentle, but carried a thread of amusement. "I am not in another country. We visit each other constantly. And Jade is taking a gap year to work. She'll be building something, and she will absolutely make time to come home. As for Jasper, you have years. And Henry is a baby. He isn't going anywhere." "You don't understand," their father said, resting his hand on his wife's shoulder with the quiet steadiness of a man who has spent his whole life being exactly where he's needed. "You've been parts of our everyday for so long. The house carries your footprints. Each time one of you walks out the door, we have to learn the shape of the space all over again." "Well," Phoebe said, her eyes bright, "I will take very good care of our girl. But speaking of our girl, Jade, have you packed? Traffic is going to make this trip twice as long as it needs to be if we wait." "I did pack, Jade glanced down at herself. "I still need to shower. I forgot to set the alarm, I was too excited, and then I woke up before it anyway, and She was already moving down the hallway. "I'll be quick, I promise." Phoebe's laughter followed her down the hall. She showered, dressed in the long skirt and blouse she had laid out the night before, and pinned her natural hair back from her face. She collected her suitcase, packed and repacked twice in the past 4 days, and rolled it toward the front door. She stopped, turned around. She walked back to the bedroom she had shared with Henry since he was born. He was still sleeping. The blanket had migrated entirely to the floor. He lay with his arms flung wide, his chest rising and falling with the easy confidence of someone who has never once struggled to rest. Jade set her suitcase down without a sound and crossed to his bedside. She stood over him for a long moment, studying the chubby softness of his cheeks, the small furrow between his brows, the way his lips curved slightly upward even in sleep. A particular pain moved through her, quiet and specific. Not the dramatic pain of loss, but the sharp, sweet ache of loving someone so completely that the thought of their absence sits in your chest like a stone that won't dissolve. She leaned down and pressed her lips very gently to his forehead. "I'll miss you, baby," she whispered. "Take care of Mom and Dad. And Jasper, too. I know I'm not going far. I know that, but it feels far right now." She smoothed the edge of his blanket. "God bless you, Hen. I'll miss you so much." She straightened up, blinked twice, and walked out before she could stay any longer. Saying goodbye to her parents in the doorway proved harder still. She hadn't expected that. She had lived in this house her entire life, had walked out of it and returned 10,000 times, and somehow this particular departure felt different. Felt like the moment in a story when the chapter actually turns. Her mother held her too long. Her father cleared his throat and patted her back with the firm, deliberate tenderness of a man containing his own emotion. By the time she slid into the passenger seat of Phoebe's car, a single tear had made it halfway down her cheek before she caught it with the back of her hand. Phoebe, who noticed everything, let the silence sit for a full minute. "It's not far away land," she said. Jade gave a wet laugh. "I know. You'll call. They'll call. Everyone will visit excessively." "I know that too. Then why are you crying?" "Because I'll miss them." She wiped her face. "The same way I missed you when you left." Phoebe's smile softened into something more complicated. She pulled out of the driveway and into the quiet morning street, and neither of them spoke for a while. Chapter 2. The road between here and there. The city loosened into suburbs, then into the open, unhurried space of the highway, and they drove in the kind of comfortable silence that only exists between people who have known each other their entire lives. Then Phoebe pulled over. Not at an exit or a rest stop. Just off the highway, onto the gravel shoulder, in the narrow strip between traffic and an open field. She put the car in park and gripped the steering wheel and said nothing. "Phoebes?" Jade turned toward her. "What's wrong?" When Phoebe finally spoke, her voice had dropped to something unguarded. Something she didn't use often, because guarding it had become a habit. "I remember when I left home. Not the version I tell. The real one. I was reckless. I made choices I would be mortified for you to know in detail. I wasted the years that Dad had worked so hard to set me up to use well. I did things I am grateful every single day that you did not follow my example and do." She stopped. Her hands tightened. "And now I'm driving to pick you up because I don't have enough money to send you to university. Because I threw so much of the time I had against a wall. It should be me paying your tuition, Jade. It should have been me setting you up the way Mom and Dad tried to set me up. Instead you're coming to work for a stranger in order to save enough money to study, and I'm—" She couldn't finish. Jade reached across the console and covered her sister's hand with her own. "No one is judging you for your past," she said quietly. "Mom and Dad have already forgiven you. And God is too, if you've truly laid it down at His feet. It's not that simple." "I didn't say it was simple. I said it was done." Jade held her gaze. "Haven't you heard that the depth of your past is the measure of the height of your future? Not because the past earns anything, but because it shows you the scale of grace you can receive. The grace you needed, it doesn't just cover what you did. It takes what you did and turns it into something that can help someone else." She squeezed Phoebe's hand. "You are not your past. You are your present. What you choose right now, that's what builds your future. And your present has to be Christ." Phoebe stared through the windshield with blurred eyes. "As for me," Jade continued, "I genuinely don't mind working for what I need. Other people have it so much harder than I do. There are people who would give anything for the path I have right now." She smiled with a particular warmth that was simply how her face worked. "We are favored, Phoebes. And the thing about favor is that it doesn't make sense. It isn't proportional to what you've earned. A rich man has a certain kind of peace that comes from comfort, and a poor man who receives a meal today has peace too, a different kind, at a different level, but real. They're not the same, but the peace is genuine for both." She paused. "Favor isn't fair. You don't understand it, and you didn't deserve it. But it's there. It has been there for you since before you found your way back. Don't let shame tell you otherwise." Phoebe sat with that for a long moment. Then she turned to look at her younger sister with an expression that mixed exasperation and love in equal, helpless measure. "When did you get so wise?" "I pay attention in church," Jade said with perfect seriousness. Then she grinned. Phoebe laughed, really laughed, the kind that fills a car and has nowhere to go and doesn't need to, and pulled back onto the highway. Chapter 3. A New Kind of Home. Marcus Osei was a large man with an easy smile and the particular gift of making every person in his vicinity feel immediately at ease. He was standing in the doorway of the apartment when Phoebe's car pulled in, already grinning before either of them had climbed out. "Jade!" He stepped forward and pulled her into a hug that was more genuine than most handshakes she had ever experienced. "I have been eagerly anticipating your arrival since the day we planned this. Especially for your sister's sake. She has precisely 0 friends, and someone needs to drag her back into the world. Please allow her to at least sit down before you begin filling her head with your nonsense," Phoebe said, pulling his ear as she shouldered past him with her bag. "She can sit down while I talk." Marcus beamed at Jade conspiratorially. "Tell me everything is well with you. Tell me you're happy." "I'm happy," Jade said. "Genuinely. I'm so grateful to be here. You have no idea how glad we are to have you." He took her suitcase before she could reach for it. "The guest room is ready. There's food which I made, which is either excellent or dangerous. Phoebe will tell you honestly which one. And Monday, we're going to find you the best possible start to this chapter." He paused. "Actually, I may already have a lead. From the kitchen, Marcus. I'm simply mentioning. Marcus. 1 friend. 1 bakery. 1 conversation. That's all." He smiled at Jade with the practiced innocence of a man who knew exactly what he was doing. "What do you think?" Jade laughed, and for the first time all day, the small stone in her chest shifted and loosened just slightly. She thanked God that night, in the quiet of the guest room with Henry's jacket pressed against her chest because she'd grabbed it by accident when she packed. She thanked God for Phoebe, and for Marcus, and for the particular mercy of arriving somewhere that was not home and still feeling, within the first hour, something close to safe. Chapter 4. The Bakery on Millbrook Street. Monday morning was overcast and cool, the kind of morning that makes a city feel quieter than usual, as though it is still summoning itself, still working up to being fully awake. Jade walked the 3 blocks to Millbrook Street alone, following Marcus's directions, until she found the bakery, a narrow storefront with fogged windows and a hand-painted sign above the door that read simply Harlow's. The bell above the door announced her when she pushed inside, and the warmth and sweetness that met her was the specific warmth of a real bakery, the kind that feels like a memory you didn't know you had. An older man looked up from the glass display case he was carefully arranging. He had the deliberate, unhurried manner of someone who has been doing the same thing for a very long time and has made his peace with it. "Good morning," Jade said. "I'm sorry to bother you. My brother-in-law, Marcus Ose, directed me here. He mentioned that a Mr. Harlow was offering waitressing positions, and I—" The man straightened up and pressed his hand to his forehead. "Oh my goodness. Marcus called me about you last week. I completely forgot. I am truly sorry, dear. I filled both positions 2 days ago." He looked genuinely apologetic. "I should have called him immediately to let him know." "It's perfectly all right," Jade said, and smiled in a way that was genuine even as she pushed the disappointment firmly below the surface. "Thank you for everything, sir." She had her hand on the door. "Wait, young lady." She turned. Mr. Harlow walked around the counter toward her, studying her face with the careful attention of someone who forms opinions slowly but holds them firmly. "Marcus is a good man. His family and mine go back years. And because of that," he scratched the back of his head, "my daughter, Cassidy, has to take a few months away from her current position. She has certain personal matters she's been putting off, and she finally cannot put them off any longer. She has been looking for someone responsible to hold her role until she returns." He paused. "If you're interested, I can speak with her today." The change in Jade's expression was not dramatic, but something in the quality of her attention sharpened, brightened. "Sir, that would mean so much to me. Please do. Come back tomorrow morning. I cannot promise she hasn't already found someone, but I will make the call." He looked at her steadily. "I should mention, it is not a traditional job. The industry Cassidy works in has a way of going to people's heads. She will explain everything. But knowing Marcus and knowing his wife, I have reason to believe you are a decent young woman with a good head." "Thank you, sir. I'll be here tomorrow." She walked home through the overcast morning feeling lighter than she had walked in. She prayed as she went, quietly, in the way she breathed, without announcing it. She thanked God for the conversation. She thanked him for the possibility. She asked for wisdom for whatever came next. She did not ask what the job was. The oversight would feel significant later. For now, she simply trusted. Chapter 5. The Terms of Employment. "Well," Mr. Harlow said the following morning, the moment the bakery bell announced her. "It seems you're in luck, dear. My daughter called me last evening. She had nearly settled on someone else, but I put in a word. She trusts my judgment, and I told her Marcus vouches for you. He poured her a coffee without asking and leaned against the counter. The person she works for is a young man called Zane Mercer. Have you heard of him? Jade thought carefully. I don't think so. Mr. Harlow blinked, then laughed, a genuine, surprised sound. That is remarkable. The whole country knows that boy's name. He's a performer, singer, actor, both, and quite successful at each. Cassidy has been his personal assistant for nearly 2 years. The position is more coordination than anything else. You manage his schedule, act as his point of contact with everyone he works with, handle communication, ensure his needs are met efficiently. It pays well. He paused and scratched his chin. The difficulty tends to be the man himself. But Cassidy will explain all that. Cassidy Harlow was the kind of person who walks into a room and immediately becomes the most interesting thing in it. She was tall and confident and had a smoothie in her hand when she slid into the chair across from Jade at a cafe that afternoon, and she looked at Jade with the frank efficiency of someone making a decision quickly. I'm going to be direct, Cassidy said, setting the smoothie down, because I don't have time to be anything else. Zane Mercer is brilliant and impossible in roughly equal measure. He is talented in ways that are genuinely difficult to explain, charming when he chooses to be, and completely unbearable the rest of the time. He doesn't interact with most people directly. That is why I exist. I am his buffer to the world. I book his meetings, manage his communications, anticipate his needs before he voices them, and keep everything from falling apart when his moods make it want to. You will essentially be his shadow. That sounds manageable, Jade said. Cassidy held her gaze for a moment. It is, because I find it genuinely engaging. But I need you to know one more thing. She turned the smoothie cup slowly in her hands. Zane and I are in a relationship. You'll be replacing everything I am to him professionally. Everything. Except that. She let the sentence sit. So as long as that's clearly understood, we won't have an issue. Jade met her eyes without any performance of reassurance. You don't need to concern yourself with that. I am here to work and to save money for my studies. That is the beginning and the complete end of what I want from this position. Something in Cassidy's posture loosened. Not entirely, but enough to change the room. Good, she said. Then let's get started. She spent the next hour walking Jade through the specifics, the contacts, the calendar systems, the communication protocols, Zane's particular preferences, and absolute non-negotiables. Jade listened with complete attention, took notes on her phone, and asked only practical questions. She was thorough and quiet, and gave nothing away. She could do this. What she did not yet understand, could not have understood from a single conversation in a cafe, was that the job as Cassidy described it was only the surface. That beneath its ordinary professional dimensions lay a story that had been written long before Jade was part of it, in ink she did not yet know existed. Chapter 6. The House That Swallowed Light. The first time Jade walked through the gates of Zane Mercer's estate, she understood immediately why people used the word estate rather than house. It was the kind of property that makes you immediately conscious of a scale of wealth you have never personally occupied, not ostentatiously decorated, but so vast and so precisely maintained that the excess was its own quiet statement. Cassidy was already there when Jade arrived, standing in the marble-floored entrance hall with her overnight bag at her feet, and the expression of someone holding two very different things in one hand with no good way to set either of them down. The man who came down the wide staircase was not what Jade had assembled in her imagination. She had built some vague picture from Cassidy's description, and the reality of Zane Mercer immediately dissolved it. He was tall in a way that changed the proportions of whatever room he entered. Dark-eyed. Still, the way a body of water is still, a surface that gives no indication of its depth. He came down the stairs looking at his phone, and he glanced up at Jade with the particular disinterest of someone who has dealt with many new assistants and expects each one to be exactly like the last. This is Jade, Cassidy said. Jade Calloway. If she makes a disaster of things, that's on you, Zane said, without looking up again. She won't, Cassidy said and nudged Jade. I won't disappoint you, sir, Jade said, directly to him, without flinching, without performing a confidence she didn't have. She simply meant it. Zane looked up from his phone for the first time. Something shifted briefly in his expression, not warmly, but with the specific attention of someone who has heard an unexpected note in a familiar song. Sir, he said, and the ghost of something crossed his face. I like that. Cassidy's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. Don't forget where I stand. You know there's only room for one person in that particular space, he said flatly, and looked back at his phone. Cassidy stared at his back with the expression of someone being slowly erased from a photograph while still standing in the frame. It was a practiced look. She had worn it before. She knew how to absorb this without showing the full damage. Yet something in her posture suggested that the cumulative weight of all the previous times she had absorbed this was beginning to add up. Jade quietly excused herself to the edge of the room. That, she breathed under her breath, barely audible, is precisely why I will never get married. Coffee. My room. 5 minutes. Zane's voice cut across the room and Jade registered, a half-beat later, that it was addressed to her. Should I? Kitchen. Coffee. You know how to make it, presumably? He was already walking away. Yes, He was gone. Jade looked around for Cassidy. Cassidy was not in the room anymore either. She found the kitchen by opening 4 wrong doors. When she finally stepped into the right room, she found it immaculate, except for a woman sitting on the floor beside the kitchen island with one hand pressed against her abdomen, her face pale, trying to rise. Not very successfully. Jade moved without thinking. She crossed the room, crouched, and slid an arm under the woman's to help her to her feet. Are you all right? Yes. I'm fine. These pains come and go. I'm accustomed to them, the woman said, straightening slowly with her hand still pressed to her side. Are you sure? I can get someone. It won't help. She said it without bitterness, with the resigned practicality of someone who has made peace with a fact that doesn't sit comfortably. Then she looked at Jade properly. Who are you? I'm Jade. I'm replacing Cassidy temporarily. I'm Mr. Zane's new. He made you call him that? No, I just thought I should. Jade. Zane's voice arrived from the doorway, carrying the specific temperature of something that has not yet fully decided whether it's anger or simply disapproval. He was leaning against the doorframe, arms crossed. I asked for coffee. You are standing in my kitchen having a conversation. Zane. The woman straightened fully, pressing one hand to her stomach and fixing him with a firm look. She was helping me up. I wasn't well. I saw 2 people talking, Zane said without inflection. Are you a physician? This last directed at Jade. No, sir, Jade said. I apologize. I'll make your coffee immediately. I no longer want it. He turned and walked out. Jade stood very still in the kitchen, processing. Then she turned to the woman, who was watching her with an expression somewhere between apology and understanding. Don't worry, the woman said. He is always exactly like that. I'm Stella, his sister. She offered her hand. My genuine advice to you, learn his rhythms and stay 1 step ahead of them. He's manageable, once you understand the pattern. But don't fall behind or it compounds. Go after him now, before it becomes something. Jade nodded and went after him. She caught up just as he was about to walk through the front door. He stopped without warning, so abruptly that she collided with his back, her nose connecting with the center of his shoulder blades with a small but precise impact. He did not turn around. Wait here, he said, and walked back inside. Jade stood in the open doorway, pressing her nose carefully with 2 fingers, and decided that whatever this job was going to require of her, it was going to require the specific kind of patience she had only ever developed through sustained, deliberate prayer. She started praying immediately. Chapter 7. The Girl with Long Skirts. The film studio was its own self-contained world, loud and precisely organized in ways that appeared completely chaotic from the outside. Zane was in the middle of shooting a film called Golden Deception, and the schedule kept them at the studio for long days during which Jade learned the rhythms of the production and made herself useful in whatever small ways she could find. She met Maya on the 3rd day, in the makeup department. Maya had quick eyes and faster opinions, and the particular gift of making someone feel, within 5 minutes of introduction, that they had been friends for years. She was leaning over a chair applying eye makeup to one of the other actors when Jade walked in with a message to deliver, and she looked up and said, before Jade had introduced herself, "You're the one replacing Cassidy." "That's me," Jade said. "I heard about you." Maya set her brush down briefly. "The decent one." "That's what Mr. Harlow said, apparently." "I don't know about that. I know about everything in this building. It's a talent." She picked up her brush again. "How are you finding it?" "Finding him, specifically?" "He's very structured," Jade said, choosing her words carefully. Maya laughed so genuinely that the person in the makeup chair startled. "That is the most diplomatic description of that man I have ever heard." She set the brush down again and extended her hand. "Maya, if you ever need someone to speak to in this building without watching every word, I'm available." "Jade." "And genuinely, thank you." 2 days later, carrying Zane's coffee, his specific coffee, at his specific temperature, in his specific cup, according to a sequence she had learned by trial and careful error, she turned a corridor corner and walked directly into the woman coming the other way. The collision was complete. The coffee went sideways. Hot liquid connected with the front of the woman's clothing in a way that was impossible to describe as anything other than a disaster. The woman was Serena Vale. Jade only learned this name afterward, but she understood immediately, from the way the rest of the corridor rearranged itself around her, from the quality of the silence that followed, that she was someone who occupied significant real estate in the world's attention. She was extraordinarily beautiful and currently wearing an expression that suggested a crime had been committed against her person. "What is wrong with you?" Serena said, stepping back. "I'm so sorry. I didn't see you. Obviously you didn't see me. You've ruined my outfit." She looked down at herself with a theatrical devastation that was, Jade thought, genuinely impressive in its precision. "This is completely unacceptable." "I am truly sorry," Jade said. "I'll find you something to change into immediately. Don't bother." Serena's eyes moved over Jade with the efficient inventory of someone assessing a person they have already decided to find lacking. "You know what I think? I think that was deliberate. I think you're like most girls in this building. You can't stand to see another woman looking better than you." She glanced toward Zane, who had appeared from the direction of the parking area. "I think she has feelings for you, darling." Jade's eyes widened, not with offense, but with genuine surprise. Zane looked at Jade, then back at Serena and laughed. A real laugh, brief and unguarded. "Her," he said. "That would certainly be ambitious." Serena turned back to Jade with the satisfied expression of a point successfully made. "Poor thing. Let me offer you some advice, since you're clearly new. You're not terrible looking, but those long skirts covering every inch of you, no one takes someone seriously who dresses like their grandmother." Jade was quiet for a moment. "My grandfather will always notice my grandmother," she said pleasantly. "But I take your point. The truth, for what it's worth, is that I walked into you because I wasn't paying sufficient attention to where I was going. Not because of any interest in your," a brief, precise pause, "boyfriend." She folded her hands in front of her. "I dress the way I dress because I'm comfortable in it, and because pleasing myself and my God is the only audience I care about. I'll bring you something clean to change into right now." She turned to Zane. "Sir, I'm very sorry about the coffee. I'll bring you another cup inside." She walked past both of them without hurrying. Behind her, she heard Serena say, "Are you going to allow that?" And Zane's reply, flat and factual. "She didn't say anything untrue." "Zane, she insulted me." "She corrected you. Take the coffee. It'll help with the temperature." His footsteps found her in the corridor a few minutes later. He fell into step beside her without preamble. "Don't speak to Serena that way again." "I understand," Jade said. He was quiet for a beat. "I want more coffee. I'll bring it to you." "Stop a moment." She stopped. He didn't look at her. He was looking at something marginally ahead of them, in the way he looked when he was making a decision he hadn't fully arrived at yet. "I'm going on tour next week. 9 days. You'll come." Jade turned to look at him. "Sir, I would need to. This job travels. If that's a problem, I'll find someone for whom it isn't. I'd need to speak with my family first. I've only just left home, and—" "You have until Thursday," he said. "Let me know." He walked ahead. She stood in the corridor alone for a moment, and then resumed walking, already composing the prayer in her head. Chapter 8, Chosen. The call home lasted 45 minutes, and involved 3 separate conversations with her mother, one very calm conversation with her father, and a joint conversation with Phoebe and Marcus together. There was concern, reasonably expressed. There were questions she couldn't fully answer. There was the particular silence of parents trying to honor their daughter's judgment, while simultaneously wanting to wrap her in something impenetrable. In the end, it was her father who said, "You have always been careful, and you have never once walked into anything without God. Go. Call us every day." She confirmed with Zane's calendar on Thursday morning. They traveled separately. Zane's team, Zane's route, Zane's timeline, and then a quieter arrangement for the support staff, of which she was apparently one, departing an hour later on a different flight. She arrived in the tour city in the early evening, her body carrying the specific heaviness of travel and insufficient sleep. She found her hotel room, set her bag down, changed into something comfortable, and sat on the edge of the bed with her Bible open in her lap. She thanked God for the safe journey. She asked for protection over her family in her absence. She prayed for wisdom in this new environment. She prayed for Stella, whose pain she hadn't been able to stop thinking about. She prayed, briefly and somewhat uncertainly, for Zane, not knowing why exactly, simply because the impulse was there and she had learned, over many years, to follow those impulses rather than examine them into stillness. She was mid-sentence when her door opened. The room went dark for a half-second as someone blocked the light from the corridor, and then the overhead light came on, and Jade sat up to find Zane Mercer standing in the middle of her hotel room as though he had every right to be there. There are several calls you need to make tonight. The briefing document has the details: venue coordinator, sound team, advance press. Everything confirmed before midnight. He was already turning to leave. Sir. He stopped. I understand that you are my employer and that you have authority over my working hours. I respect that. She kept her voice even. But you just entered my private room without knocking. That is not something I will accept, regardless of circumstance. If you need something from me outside of working hours, please call or text. Please do not enter my room. He turned. Very slowly. He looked at her with the expression of someone who has not been addressed this way in a very long time, possibly ever. You value this job, he said. Yes, sir. Then learn when to speak. He left. The door clicked shut. Jade sat in the silence for 10 seconds. Then she picked up her phone, found the briefing document, and began making the calls. Her hands were not entirely steady. Her jaw was set. But she made the calls, thoroughly professionally, one by one, and somewhere in the middle of the second number, she whispered something under her breath that was equal parts prayer and quiet resolve. She was not going to be moved. Not by discomfort. Not by rudeness. Not by a man who had never once been told that another person's privacy was worth respecting. She was simply... Chapter 9, The Concert. The venue was a theater with the warm, expectant feeling of a room built entirely for one purpose: listening. Jade had arrived early to run through the final coordination details and was standing to one side of the stage, clipboard in hand, when the opening act concluded and the crowd shifted into the particular, charged electricity that precedes something the audience has been waiting for. She had heard Zane perform before at the studio in fragments, a melody carried down a corridor, a full passage through an open rehearsal room door. But live, in a space built for it, with several thousand people leaning forward in their seats as one, it was something different. She was not a person who assigned worth to strangers based on their fame. She had never understood that particular arithmetic. But she found herself standing very still at the edge of the stage, listening, with the honest admission that the man could sing, not just in the technical sense, but in the way that certain people speak, as if the sound originated somewhere behind the voice, from something that had more to say than words alone could carry. During the interval between numbers, he looked toward the wings and found her face in the dark. She didn't look away. He didn't either, for a moment. Then he said something into the microphone that she didn't immediately parse. He said he was going to sing the next song differently tonight, that someone had told him recently that his voice created an atmosphere his audience deserved to be inside of, and he hadn't been able to stop thinking about that. He dedicated the song to the most honest person in this building. The crowd responded warmly. Jade stood very still. After the show, he appeared behind her in the backstage corridor. "Walk with me," he said. "Not a question. I have things to finish before I can. Maya can handle the rest. Walk with me." They walked out through a side exit and into the quiet of a street still reverberating from the dispersed crowd. The city made its usual sounds in the distance. The air was cool and carried the end of the evening in it. "You didn't have to dedicate the song," Jade said. "I know. I only told you that you had a good voice. It was a simple observation. I know that too, but I thought about it more than I expected to." He walked with his hands in his jacket pockets, eyes forward. So, she echoed, and then, to her own surprise, she laughed. It was not the appropriate moment for laughter, which was precisely why it arrived. It came out in a quiet, involuntary wave, and she pressed her hand over her mouth, but it was already there. Zane stopped walking and looked at her with the sincere concern of someone questioning her stability. "Are you quite all right?" "I'm sorry," she managed. "I do this. I laugh in long silences. I think of my sister's reaction the first time I did it around her, and that makes it worse." She exhaled, getting control of herself. "I'm fine. Genuinely fine." He started walking again slowly. "Remarkable," he said, with the tone of someone concluding they've been assigned to the least predictable person alive. They walked in quiet for a minute. Then Jade said, "Zane?" "Yes." "Are we friends?" He glanced at her. "What kind of question is that?" "A sincere one. Because I feel like you might be forcing the company. And I don't understand why someone like you would bother." "I'm not forcing anything." "You're sure?" "I find you different," he said. "From most people I spend time around. That's all." Jade was quiet. Then, "I don't think you actually see me as your equal. I think people from where you come from look at people like me and see something beneath them. And I think you're either curious about the novelty or you're genuinely bored, and I'm the most unusual thing available." She said it without anger, simply stating what she believed to be the truth. He stopped walking. She stopped too. He turned to face her and took a step toward her. Something in how he was looking at her was different from how he usually looked at her. Not the careless regard he used for most people, but something more direct, more unshielded. He stepped forward and, very gently, placed one finger in front of her lips. "Don't say that," he said quietly. "I don't classify people that way. I know the impression I've given. I know I've been exactly that toward you in certain moments. But that is not actually what I think of you." He paused. Something moved behind his eyes that he didn't fully suppress. "You are kind. You are completely honest. You are entirely yourself in a world where almost no one is entirely themselves. You say what you mean, and you mean what you say, and you laugh for no reason on empty streets. I haven't had someone like that near me." He held her gaze. "Please don't take that away." The street was very quiet. Jade looked at him for a long moment. "Okay," she said simply. "Okay." They walked back toward the hotel together, speaking more freely now. About random things, small things, the kinds of conversation that only happen when two people have stopped performing for each other. Jade talked about Henry, about her father's habit of clearing his throat before something important, about the way her church congregation sang, about the town she grew up in and how it smelled in autumn. Zane listened in a way she noticed, actually listened, asked follow-up questions, remembered details from earlier in the same sentence. It was the most human she had ever seen him. They stopped outside her room. "That was a good walk," Zane said. "It was," she agreed. "I'd like to do it again sometime." "Okay." She smiled. "Good night, Zane." Something shifted in his expression. He looked at her face, her mouth, and she saw the intention forming a half-second before he acted on it. He stepped forward, head tilting slightly. She stepped back. "No." He paused. "Jade." "No," she said again, clearly and without heat. "I am not that kind of person. I have never been and I will never be. Please don't." "Don't do that," he said. "After an hour of actually talking to each other, you can't honestly tell me you feel nothing. What I feel is irrelevant to what I will or won't do. My choices come from my values, not my feelings. And my answer is no." She turned to put her key in the door. She felt his hands before she could complete the turn, one arm at her waist, his face moving toward the side of her neck. The slap was not premeditated. It was reflexive, precise, and significant. The silence that followed it was enormous. She turned to face him fully. Her voice did not shake. "Listen to me carefully. I am not a game, and I am not a prize, and I am not something to be taken because you've decided to. When I said no, I meant no. I have never meant anything more in my life." She held his gaze. "Do not touch me again without my consent. Good night." She went inside. She sat on the edge of the bed in the dark and breathed, deliberately counting each exhale, for 30 full seconds. Then she said into the quiet room, "Lord, I don't know exactly what I'm doing here. But you do. And that is enough." Chapter 10, War in the Spirit. Zane stood outside her door for a long moment after it closed. Then he walked to his own room and shut the door behind him and stood in front of the mirror above the dresser and stared at his own reflection. He could feel his heartbeat in his face. His rage was physical. It moved through him like current through a wire, looking for anything to discharge into. He picked up the lamp from the bedside table and sent it directly into the wall. The sound was satisfying in the particular, hollow way that destruction sometimes is. Then he heard it. A voice. Low. Feminine. Coming from no specific location in the room, or from all of them, simultaneously. "Zane." He turned. Nothing visible. "Who is that?" "Zane." Lyra's voice was something that existed below the threshold of ordinary sound, felt before it was heard, resonating somewhere deep in his chest. "Where are you?" he asked. "You made a mistake tonight," she said. "I told you she was different. I said it before you began. This one cannot be reached the way others have been reached." The approach requires patience. Precision. You cannot simply. She struck me, Zane said, and his voice was low and controlled, which was somehow worse than if he had shouted. No one has ever. Because you gave her no other choice. Her voice stayed level and cool. You rushed. You allowed your ego to dictate your timing. A pause. Her soul is not like the others, Zane. It is worth more than 10,000 of the ones you have already handed over combined. You cannot afford to lose this assignment because your pride was bruised. The silence shifted in quality. Take your time. Make her trust you. Not the surface trust, real trust, the kind that comes from believing she knows who you are. The fall has to come from within her own choices. That is the only way it holds. You know this. I know, he said. The two words came out carrying everything in him that was not reconciled. Then do not let one slap end what took months to arrange. Begin again. Slowly. The voice faded. The room was ordinary again. Zane stood at the window and looked out at the city lights below. Thousands of small illuminations in the dark, none of them lit for him, none of them meaning anything, and something settled beneath the rage. Something colder and more deliberate. I will take my time, he said to the glass. And I will not miss. Chapter 11, A New Approach. He was already at the breakfast table when she arrived the following morning. That alone was unusual. In the weeks Jade had been working for him, she had never seen him in a communal space before 10. She paused at the entrance to the hotel restaurant, notebook in hand, and found him looking at her with an expression she did not immediately recognize. It was not precisely apology, but it was in that direction. Sit down, he said. She sat. She was a professional. Last night, he started. You don't have to. I'm speaking. She went quiet. I behaved badly. I won't do it again. He said it the way someone reads an item from a list, factually, without additional texture. But he said it, and saying it seemed to cost him something he was not accustomed to paying. Jade looked at him steadily. She had several things she could have said. She chose the most useful. Thank you. He nodded once. Agenda for today? And they worked. This was how it began. His new approach, though Jade could not have named it as such from the inside of it. He became less absent, less cutting. He began to appear at the edges of conversations she was having with the crew and simply listen, not announcing himself, not inserting himself, just present. He asked her questions that had nothing to do with work. Small questions, seemingly inconsequential. What she had eaten for breakfast. Whether she had slept well. Once, on a long drive between tour cities, staring at the road with an expression she couldn't read, whether she believed that people could fundamentally change. She told him what she thought, the way she always did, plainly, without softening it for an audience. He listened with the specific quality of attention she had begun to notice, not passive reception, but actual engagement. When she finished, he gave his own view in return, not the polished, public version, but something that felt like his genuine position. She found herself surprised, repeatedly, by the intelligence of it, by the dimensions of him that didn't match the surface she had been given. She was careful. She remained careful. She watched the edge of whatever this was with the attentiveness of someone walking near deep water who knows they cannot swim. But she began to look forward to the parts of the day where they overlapped. Maya noticed first, because Maya noticed everything. Something changes in him when he's near you, Maya said one afternoon, touching up a colleague's makeup with one eye on the mirror where Jade's reflection was visible. Something is different. He's my employer, Jade said. I know what employers look like. That is a different thing entirely. Maya studied her work in the mirror. How are you holding up, honestly? This life isn't a simple one. I'm well. I have what I need. Which is? Jade paused. God, she said, with the same straightforwardness with which she said everything. I pray a great deal. It's not a thing I do when things become difficult. It's where I live. So yes. Always. Maya was quiet for a moment. Then, in a different tone, I want to understand that someday. What that's like. You can, Jade said. Anytime you want. Chapter 12, Stella. Back in the city, in the odd pockets of time between tasks at the estate, Jade found herself gravitating toward Stella's company. It had started simply. She had noticed Stella in pain on more than one occasion, had brought her tea without being asked, had sat with her for a few minutes when the mornings were long and the house was quiet. Stella had not asked her to stop. That was its own kind of invitation. Stella had a quiet beauty and a dryness that Jade recognized as the armor of someone who has lived in close proximity to a particular kind of storm for long enough to learn not to show too much. She was sharp and occasionally devastating in the precision of her observations, and she watched Jade with an attention that felt protective, as if she was already invested in Jade's outcome and hoping it would be better than her own. "Can I ask you something?" Jade said one afternoon, setting 2 cups of tea on the small table on Stella's balcony and sitting across from her. "You can ask me anything. I won't necessarily answer, but you can ask. Your health. The pains you have." Jade looked at her directly. "Are you being looked after? Is someone taking this seriously?" Stella looked at the city below for a moment. "No," she said simply. "Not really. I've made a kind of peace with what I can't change. I don't think you should make peace with something that might have a different outcome if someone was fighting for it." Jade paused. "I mean that sincerely, not critically." "I know." Stella's voice softened. "You are the first person in this house who has spoken to me like I'm a complete person in a very long time." She looked at her tea. "My brother is what he is. I love him because I have to and because I do regardless of everything. But proximity to Zane has always carried a cost." She was quiet for a moment. "Everything he touches either gets what it wants from him or gets broken. I have never been entirely sure which category I fall into." Jade held the words carefully before speaking. "I pray for Zane," she said. "Every night. I don't fully understand why I started, but I have and I haven't stopped." Stella looked at her sharply. "Do you?" "Yes." Jade picked up her tea. "I believe that no one is beyond the reach of God." "That sounds simple." "I don't mean it simply." Stella stared at her for a long, still moment. When she spoke again, her voice had changed register. "I have prayed for him for years. I started losing faith that it was going anywhere." "It's going somewhere," Jade said, with the calm certainty of someone who has staked their entire life on one thing and never once found it insufficient. "I believe that with everything I am." Stella didn't respond, but she looked at Jade with an expression that was the closest thing to hope she had worn in a very long. Chapter 12. Stella. Back in the city, in the odd pockets of time between tasks at the estate, Jade found herself gravitating towards Stella's company. It had started simply. She had noticed Stella in pain on more than one occasion, had brought her tea without being asked, had sat with her for a few minutes when the mornings were long and the house was quiet. Stella had not asked her to stop. That was its own kind of invitation. Stella had a quiet beauty and a dryness that Jade recognized as the armor of someone who has lived in close proximity to a particular kind of storm for long enough to learn not to show too much. She was sharp and occasionally devastating in the precision of her observations, and she watched Jade with an attention that felt protective, as if she was already invested in Jade's outcome and hoping it would be better than her own. "Can I ask you something?" Jade said one afternoon, setting 2 cups of tea on the small table on Stella's balcony and sitting across from her. "You can ask me anything. I won't necessarily answer, but you can ask. Your health. The pains you have." Jade looked at her directly. "Are you being looked after? Is someone taking this seriously?" Stella looked at the city below for a moment. "No," she said simply. "Not really. I've made a kind of peace with what I can't change. I don't think you should make peace with something that might have a different outcome if someone was fighting for it." Jade paused. "I mean that sincerely, not critically." "I know." Stella's voice softened. "You are the first person in this house who has spoken to me like I'm a complete person in a very long time." She looked at her tea. "My brother is what he is. I love him because I have to and because I do regardless of everything. But proximity to Zane has always carried a cost." She was quiet for a moment. "Everything he touches either gets what it wants from him or gets broken. I have never been entirely sure which category I fall into." Jade held the words carefully before speaking. "I pray for Zane," she said. "Every night. I don't fully understand why I started, but I have and I haven't stopped." Stella looked at her sharply. "Do you?" "Yes." Jade picked up her tea. "I believe that no one is beyond the reach of God." "That sounds simple." "I don't mean it simply." Stella stared at her for a long, still moment. When she spoke again, her voice had changed register. "I have prayed for him for years. I started losing faith that it was going anywhere." "It's going somewhere," Jade said, with the calm certainty of someone who has staked their entire life on one thing and never once found it insufficient. "I believe that with everything I am." Stella didn't respond, but she looked at Jade with an expression that was the closest thing to hope she had worn in a very long time. Chapter 13. Cracks in Marble. The crew had wrapped for the day, and the studio floor was nearly empty when Jade found Zane in one of the rehearsal rooms, sitting at the piano with his hands in his lap. The keyboard in front of him was untouched. She stood in the doorway. "You have the call with the promoter in 20 minutes. "I know." She was about to leave. Then she didn't. "Is something wrong?" He looked up. "Why would something be wrong?" "Because you're sitting at a piano you're not playing. And you always play when you sit there." He held her gaze for a moment. Then he looked back at the keys. "I had a dream last night," he said. "About someone I haven't thought about in years." A pause. "My mother. She used to sing. I got the voice from her, I think. But she stopped when I was young. I never really understood why." He touched one key softly, not pressing it far enough to sound. In the dream she was singing again. I couldn't make out the words. But the sound was good. Jade offered quietly. "Something like that." He was quiet. Then, "I don't know why I'm telling you this." "Maybe because I'm here," Jade said. "And because you don't have to perform anything for me." He looked at her again. Something moved across his face, complex, not fully readable, the expression of someone registering a sensation they don't have a name for. "You're a strange person, Jade Calloway," he said. And it came out sounding almost like something else, something he was not entirely in control of. "So I've been told," she said and smiled. 20 minutes, Zane." He turned back to the piano and pressed a single chord, soft, open, unresolved. It hung in the air for a moment before fading. Then he stood, picked up his phone, and walked to the door. But he looked back at her once before he left the room. She noticed. She told herself she didn't. She opened her notebook and made a note about the call. She prayed harder that night than she had in weeks, though she could not have articulated exactly what she was praying against, or for. Chapter 14, The Other Side. There were nights when Lyra came and nights when she left him alone. He had come to prefer her visits. At least they were a presence. The nights without her were something else. The nights without her, he was left entirely with himself, and he was not, it turned out, comfortable company. She came on a Thursday, when rain blurred the city outside his window into something impressionistic, and the house was very quiet. Her voice came from the room itself, rather than any single point in it. "You are falling behind," she said. "I'm being patient." "You said to be patient. Patient has a direction. What you're doing lately has no direction." A pause. "The girl in the makeup department is changing. The sister is changing. She is reaching people, Zane. Every day you fail to move forward, something is built in this house that did not exist before. And our king takes careful note of what his servants allow to be built." Zane stood at the window and said nothing. "Mira is becoming impatient," Lyra added, and this landed differently from everything else. "She has given you until the end of the calendar quarter. Complete the task before then, or she will choose to be directly involved. Mira doesn't come here. She will if you fail to finish. You know her capabilities. You know what she is willing to use." A pause filled with the weight of implication. "Don't make her come, Zane." He turned from the window. "I'll handle it. Before the quarter ends." Her presence thinned and was gone. He stood in the dark for a long time, his reflection in the rain-smeared glass looking back at him with an expression he didn't entirely recognize. He had looked at his own reflection thousands of times in this life, and had always found something familiar. Tonight, he found a stranger. He looked away first. Chapter 15, The Phone Call. Jade's phone rang at 6 in the morning. She was already awake, already in her quiet time with God, and the number on the screen put her immediately upright. Jasper never called unless something was wrong. "Jade." His voice was trying very hard to be older than it was. "Mom is in the hospital. She collapsed last night. Dad's been there since midnight. He made me wait to call you so you wouldn't lose sleep, but I couldn't wait any longer. You did the right thing," she said. "Which hospital? Tell me everything." She wrote it down with hands that were not quite steady. After Jasper's voice was gone from the line, she sat with the phone pressed against her chest and closed her eyes. She would not cry yet. She would pray first. She would think clearly. She would do what needed to be done. A knock at the door. She opened it to find Zane. He must have heard her voice in the corridor, or seen her light on before sunrise. He looked at her face for approximately 2 seconds. "What happened?" he said. Not a question. She had not planned to tell him. But he asked with the directness he used for everything, and she was very tired and very frightened, and she said, "My mother is in the hospital. I need to get home." He was quiet for a moment. Then, "I have access to a charter aircraft on standby. It can be arranged within a few hours." She stared at him. "Zane, consider it compassionate leave with appropriate transportation. Pack a bag. I'll make the call." He said it with no performance of generosity. He said it like a fact being established. "Thank you," she said. She didn't have anything else, and she meant it completely. He nodded once, started to turn, then stopped. "She'll be all right," he said. He was looking at the wall when he said it, not at her. "Go." She packed her bag with tears running quietly down her face, and the certainty, somewhere below all the fear, that God was present in the details of even this. Even the inexplicable, unexpected kindness of a man she had barely begun to understand. Chapter 16. What he couldn't name. He had not intended to follow her. He had a legitimate reason to be in the same city, a meeting that had been on the calendar for weeks, a network executive who could not accommodate any other date or location. He told himself this was the reason he went. He believed it was the reason, for approximately as long as it took him to find himself standing outside the hospital where her mother was being treated, hands in his jacket pockets, looking up at a building that had no business meaning anything to him. He didn't go in. He crossed the street and sat on a bench in the small park opposite and did something he hadn't done in longer than he could remember. He simply sat still, with no agenda, no performance, no task to complete or angle to work. He sat and watched the entrance and tried, with considerably less success than he was accustomed to understand what was happening inside him. She came out in the late afternoon. Her family was with her. The older couple he had heard described so many times that he recognized them before he could have explained how. Her father's careful bearing, her mother moving with the particular tentative quality of someone recently frightened. The teenage boy walking too straight, trying to be the right thing for the women around him. And the small one, Henry, who wrapped himself around Jade's legs from behind before she'd fully reached the pavement, and she reached back and lifted him in a single motion, without breaking her stride, without thinking about it, his weight shifting onto her hip as naturally as breathing. Something about that gesture broke a small thing in Zane's chest that he hadn't known needed breaking. Something that had been sealed over for a very long time, perhaps since before he was old enough to know what sealing was. He watched her talk to her family. From across the street, he could see the quality of what she was doing. She was holding them up. She was saying things that made her mother's shoulders drop with release, that made her teenage brother walk a fraction taller. She was doing it with her hands and her posture and whatever was on her face, without apparent effort, the way she did everything, naturally, as if the possibility of being anything else had never occurred to her. He sat on the bench until they turned the corner and were gone from his sight. He was late to his meeting. That evening, alone in his hotel room, he sat in the chair by the window and tried to remember the last time he had wanted something that had not been placed in front of him by the machinery he served. He couldn't locate it. Every desire he had ever had been either assigned, procured, or borrowed. He had not, in any real sense, wanted something of his own in as long as he could trace. He did not want to take anything from Jade. The thought arrived and sat down in him like something that had always been there, waiting to be seen. He didn't want to diminish her or dismantle her or deliver her to anything that would leave her less than she was. He pressed the thought flat, stood up, poured himself water, and stood at the window and told himself, with the firmness of someone addressing a subordinate, that he had a task, a timeline, an obligation that had predated everything he currently felt and would outlast it, that he had never successfully escaped and had no current reason to believe he could escape. He drank his water. He went to bed. He didn't sleep until nearly 4 a.m, and when he finally did, he dreamed of his mother singing. Chapter 17. What she sensed. When Jade returned to the city 4 days later, her mother stable, recovering, the family's nerves as settled as she could make them in the time available, she stepped back into the rhythms of the job with a fresh layer of gratitude layered over whatever fatigue remained. Zane did not ask about her family when she returned. That was his way. He registered things once and did not revisit them. But she noticed that the mornings had changed. The coffee she brought to his desk had begun appearing there already, 2 cups, one of which was hers, which she had not arranged. She did not mention it. She began to pray for him more specifically. This was not a sentimental development. It grew from something quieter and less explicable, a sense she had developed slowly, through weeks of close proximity, that something was wrong in a dimension she couldn't name. She had known people who carried darkness. Everyone carried some. But what she sensed around Zane was different. Layered. Ancient somehow. Like something that had been present long before he had. She did not try to name it. She brought it to God instead, in the early mornings before the house stirred, and asked for whatever eyes were needed to see what she needed to see, and wisdom for whatever came next. One morning she read in her Bible, For we do not wrestle against flesh and blood, but against principalities, against powers, against the rulers of the darkness of this age. She read it twice, set the Bible down, looked at the wall. Then she prayed for Zane with a specific, focused intensity that surprised even herself. Not for his career, not for his success, but for the thing underneath all of it. The soul underneath the surface. The person underneath the performance. God, she said, I don't know what is at work in him. But you do. And you have never lost anyone yet. Chapter 18, The Breaking Point. The day Mira came was a day that looked entirely ordinary from the outside. Jade arrived at the estate to find it unusually quiet. No crew moving in and out. No meetings on the morning schedule. Zane was in his study, door closed, which meant do not enter. Stella was upstairs. The house had a quality she couldn't quite place, a held-breath quality, like the air immediately before a storm that you feel on your skin before you see it forming in the sky. She was making her way to the kitchen when she heard something. Not voices she recognized. Not sounds from inside the house, exactly, more something she felt than heard, emanating from the direction of the study. A frequency just below the range of ordinary perception. The kind of thing that sits between your ears and the space behind them. She stopped in the corridor. She did not move toward the study. She stood where she was, and she began to pray. Steadily, under her breath, the way she breathed, automatically, without thinking about beginning. In the study, Zane stood with his arms at his sides, looking at the figure that had materialized in the space between the window and the fireplace. Mira was beautiful the way deep water is beautiful, completely, without negotiation, in a way that made everything else seem approximate by comparison. She had been still when he first saw her, but she moved now, crossing the room in a slow arc, studying him the way someone studies a chess piece they are deciding whether to sacrifice. You are out of time, she said. Her voice was nothing like Lyra's measured coolness. Mira was the ocean, vast and unbothered, and entirely capable of disaster. I'm handling it. You have been handling it since the beginning of the year. She stopped in front of him. Our king does not wait, Zane. His patience has a shape, and you are past it. Give me more time. There is no more time to give. I have arranged something. An event. One final situation, constructed with care. All that is required of you is to do nothing, simply do nothing while the plan completes itself. She watched his face with absolute steadiness. Can you manage that? Zane looked at the fireplace. When? Saturday evening. The charity reception at the Edgewater. She will be there professionally. Everything else is arranged. She tilted her head. Do nothing. That is your only role. Do you understand? Yes, he said. In the corridor, Jade finished praying. She stood in the sudden quiet of the house and felt, without any way to explain it, that something was coming. She didn't know what it was. She didn't know its shape or its timing or what it intended. But she knew, with the deep, unshakable certainty that had always been the most reliable thing in her life, that she was not going to face it alone. Father, she said quietly to the empty corridor, whatever is coming, I am yours. And you are here. She went to the kitchen to begin the day's work. Chapter 19, The Reception. The Edgewater Hotel on Saturday evening was precisely what charity receptions always are, elegant, expensive, and full of people who are performing their generosity for each other, while simultaneously serving a genuinely useful function. Jade was there in her professional capacity, managing the logistics of Zane's schedule, confirming arrangements, navigating him through introductions, and gracefully extracting him from conversations that overstayed their welcome. The evening proceeded normally. Then it didn't. She didn't know afterward, with any certainty, what had happened or how. A drink she had set down and picked up again. A moment where the room became imprecise, where her own thoughts took slightly longer than usual to arrive. A sensation of being adjacent to herself rather than fully inside. She was aware enough to know something was wrong. She was aware enough to recognize the shape of the situation she was drifting toward. A side room, a closed door, circumstances carefully designed to place her where she had never been and had never chosen to be. She stopped. She put her back against a wall. She closed her eyes. And she prayed. Not with words, exactly. There weren't enough words for it, and words were taking too long. She directed everything she was toward the only thing she had ever fully trusted. The same way a compass needle doesn't reason its way to north but simply points. She felt the disorientation ebb. Slowly. Slower than she wanted. But it ebbed. She found her phone. She called Phoebe. She held onto Phoebe's voice on the other end of the line like a rope thrown across water, and she breathed, and she stayed exactly where she was. Then someone was beside her. Zane. He was there the way he moved through spaces, completely without announcement. He looked at her face for 2 seconds, assessed the situation with the rapid precision of someone who understood immediately what had happened, and said nothing. He took her arm, steadily, without demand, nothing like the last time he had touched her, and he walked her out of the room. Out of the corridor, through a side exit, and into the cool air of the hotel garden. She leaned against the garden wall and breathed. He stood in front of her with his hands at his sides. "Are you all right?" he asked. "I will be." She looked up at him. "What happened in there?" "You're out now," he said. "That's what matters." She watched his face, the set of his jaw, the particular quality of his not quite meeting her eyes. "Did you know something was arranged for tonight?" He was quiet too long. "Zane, you're safe," he said again. She studied him for a long, still moment. "Then, you came for me. You didn't have to. And you came for me." He said nothing. "Thank you," she said, quietly and completely. Not performed. Not diplomatic. Just true. He looked up at her then. And whatever was behind his eyes in that moment was not any expression she had catalogued in all her months of working beside him. It was something else. Something that looked unmistakably like it hurt. He nodded once. He offered his arm. She took it, and they walked back through the garden toward the hotel entrance in a silence that was nothing like the silences they had started with, nothing like the silences of two people who don't know each other or don't trust each other. This one was full of things that neither of them was ready to say. Chapter 20, Favor. The morning after the reception, Jade woke early. She sat in the quiet of her room and let the events of the previous night arrange themselves in her mind. She understood, now, that something had been arranged against her. She didn't know the full shape of it. She didn't know who had built it or all the ways it had been designed to undo her. But she had walked through it. She had not broken. She was here. She thought about Zane. She thought about the look on his face in the garden. About the fact that he had come for her when the simplest and most natural thing in the world would have been to stay exactly where he was. She didn't know what it meant. She didn't know what he was fully. She had never been able to see him clearly, in the way she could see most people. There was always something she couldn't quite reach. But she had prayed for him consistently for months, and God knew every dimension of this story that she didn't, and she chose to rest in that. She opened her Bible. Her eyes found the passage without searching. "No weapon formed against you shall prosper." She closed the Bible, folded her hands. "Thank you," she said simply. Then, after a moment, with a quiet certainty she couldn't explain, "And thank you for him. Whatever that is. Whatever it means." Across the estate, Zane was sitting on the edge of his bed with his elbows on his knees. He had not slept. He had failed. By every measure the world he served used, he had failed entirely. He had been given one instruction: do nothing, allow the plan to complete. He had overridden it. He had walked into that reception with full knowledge of what was arranged, and he had extracted Jade from the center of it. He had acted directly against the task, against the obligation, against everything that had defined him since before he could remember. And he could not find it in himself to regret it. That was the most disturbing thing. He was accustomed to having at least pragmatic self-interest to lean on, the cold calculation that reminded him what he was protecting by staying aligned with his purpose. It didn't arrive. All that was there was the memory of her face in the garden, frightened and exhausted but pulling herself together with the same quiet, unremarkable determination she applied to every other difficulty, and something living in his chest that had no framework in anything he knew. He had spent his entire life in service to destruction. He had broken things and people and possibilities, and had never once considered the arithmetic of it, because there was always more of everything the arrangement provided. More protection, more provision, more whatever Lyra arranged. He sat at the edge of his bed in the early morning, and tried to account for what he had lost by being exactly what he was. He had lost a mother who used to sing and stopped. He had lost a sister who was being quietly destroyed by proximity to a darkness she had never consented to be part of. He had lost years and years to a purpose that had never produced, in him, a single thing that resembled joy, or peace, or the particular feeling of walking through a hotel garden with Jade's hand in the crook of his arm, saying nothing, and finding it to be, somehow, the most real thing he had experienced in as long as he could trace. He pressed his hands over his face. Lyra's voice arrived almost before he heard it. "You have made a catastrophic mistake," she said. "I know," he said. "The consequences of what you've done." "I know." He lowered his hands. Tell me one thing. Just one thing, honestly. In everything you've arranged for me. In everything you've given and everything you've taken and everything you've made me do. Has any of it ever been for me? Or has it all been for the king? Silence. Tell me, he said. You already know the answer, Lyra said, very quietly. He did. Then we're finished, he said. The presence in the room contracted. You cannot simply be finished, Zane. This isn't a contract you can unilaterally. She prays for me, he said. He wasn't sure why he said it out loud, but saying it changed its weight. Every morning. She doesn't know who I am. She doesn't know any of it. And she prays for me because it is simply who she is. Because the God she serves doesn't leave people at the edge of their darkness. He looked at the window. Whatever it costs me, I'm done. The presence was gone. The room was completely ordinary. He sat in it for a long time. Then he found his phone and scrolled to Stella's name. She answered on the second ring, because she always answered quickly when he called unexpectedly, as though she had been waiting for a call that might be different from all the previous ones. Are you all right? She said. No, he said. Not yet, but I think I might be beginning to be. A long pause. Stella, can you find me someone to talk to? Not a therapist. Someone who knows about God. Seriously knows. The silence on her end lasted exactly 3 seconds. Yes, she said, and her voice was thick in a way she wasn't going to try to explain. Yes, Zane. I can do that. Chapter 20, Favor. The morning after the reception, Jade woke early. She sat in the quiet of her room and let the events of the previous night arrange themselves in her mind. She understood, now, that something had been arranged against her. She didn't know the full shape of it. She didn't know who had built it or all the ways it had been designed to undo her. But she had walked through it. She had not broken. She was here. She thought about Zane. She thought about the look on his face in the garden. About the fact that he had come for her when the simplest and most natural thing in the world would have been to stay exactly where he was. She didn't know what it meant. She didn't know what he was fully. She had never been able to see him clearly, in the way she could see most people. There was always something she couldn't quite reach. But she had prayed for him consistently for months, and God knew every dimension of this story that she didn't, and she chose to rest in that. She opened her Bible. Her eyes found the passage without searching. No weapon formed against you shall prosper. She closed the Bible, folded her hands. Thank you, she said simply. Then, after a moment, with a quiet certainty she couldn't explain, and thank you for him. Whatever that is. Whatever it means. Across the estate, Zane was sitting on the edge of his bed with his elbows on his knees. He had not slept. He had failed. By every measure the world he served used, he had failed entirely. He had been given one instruction: do nothing, allow the plan to complete. He had overridden it. He had walked into that reception with full knowledge of what was arranged, and he had extracted Jade from the center of it. He had acted directly against the task, against the obligation, against everything that had defined him since before he could remember. And he could not find it in himself to regret it. That was the most disturbing thing. He was accustomed to having at least pragmatic self-interest to lean on, the cold calculation that reminded him what he was protecting by staying aligned with his purpose. It didn't arrive. All that was there was the memory of her face in the garden, frightened and exhausted but pulling herself together with the same quiet, unremarkable determination she applied to every other difficulty, and something living in his chest that had no framework in anything he knew. He had spent his entire life in service to destruction. He had broken things and people and possibilities, and had never once considered the arithmetic of it, because there was always more of everything the arrangement provided. More protection, more provision, more whatever Lyra arranged. He sat at the edge of his bed in the early morning, and tried to account for what he had lost by being exactly what he was. He had lost a mother who used to sing and stopped. He had lost a sister who was being quietly destroyed by proximity to a darkness she had never consented to be part of. He had lost years and years to a purpose that had never produced, in him, a single thing that resembled joy, or peace, or the particular feeling of walking through a hotel garden with Jade's hand in the crook of his arm, saying nothing, and finding it to be, somehow, the most real thing he had experienced in as long as he could trace. He pressed his hands over his face. Lyra's voice arrived almost before he heard it. You have made a catastrophic mistake, she said. I know, he said. The consequences of what you've done. I know. He lowered his hands. Tell me one thing. Just one thing, honestly. In everything you've arranged for me. In everything you've given and everything you've taken and everything you've made me do. Has any of it ever been for me? Or has it all been for the king? Silence. Tell me, he said. You already know the answer, Lyra said, very quietly. He did. Then we're finished, he said. The presence in the room contracted. You cannot simply be finished, Zane. This isn't a contract you can unilaterally. She prays for me, he said. He wasn't sure why he said it out loud, but saying it changed its weight. Every morning. She doesn't know who I am. She doesn't know any of it. And she prays for me because it is simply who she is. Because the God she serves doesn't leave people at the edge of their darkness. He looked at the window. Whatever it costs me, I'm done. The presence was gone. The room was completely ordinary. He sat in it for a long time. Then he found his phone and scrolled to Stella's name. She answered on the second ring, because she always answered quickly when he called unexpectedly, as though she had been waiting for a call that might be different from all the previous ones. Are you all right? She said. No, he said. Not yet, but I think I might be beginning to be. A long pause. Stella, can you find me someone to talk to? Not a therapist. Someone who knows about God. Seriously knows. The silence on her end lasted exactly 3 seconds. Yes, she said, and her voice was thick in a way she wasn't going to try to explain. Yes, Zane. I can do that.